Welcome back to Truth Be Told with Tony and Eddie, where we believe an experience becomes truth. I'm your host, Tony Sweet, and joining me now is my co-host, world-renowned psychic, Eddie Connor. Thank you for supporting our sponsors, Conscious Life Expo, by going to ConsciousLifeExpo.com to get your tickets for the February 15th, 2015 event.
And we encourage you to take your mind on a literary journey by traveling over to AdventuresUnlimitedPress.com and purchase any of the books from our famed experts right here on Truth Be Told. In our first hour, we talked with Chris Williams, the former historical researcher and investigator of the Sci-Fi Channel's Ghost Hunters. Now, Chris spoke about what it takes to become a researcher and how important it is to find out about the history of the entities. In this hour, paranormal investigator Chad Lewis will be joining us.
And Chad is an authority of the subject of unexplained research. Chad has traveled the world in search of the paranormal, from tracking vampires in Transylvania
to chasing chupacabras in Puerto Rico, to searching for the elusive Loch Ness Monster, which proves to Tony and I that paranormal activity goes way beyond ghosts and spirits. Please welcome author and paranormal researcher Chad Lewis.
Welcome, Chad.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Of course. I'm here with my co-host, Mr. Eddie Connor.
Hi, Chad.
Hey, good afternoon, good evening.
Thank you.
Well, we want to thank you, first of all, for joining us for this wonderful show today, because with you and Chris in the first hour, it is such a joy for us, because these are topics that we just hold passion to our hearts. And so we talked about a lot of paranormal ghost-wise, and we're going to talk about that with you too, but yours kind of broadens out because paranormal means so much more than just ghosts and spirits, like we said in the intro. But before we get into your travels, let's talk about where you got started and how you got started in this industry of paranormal.
I blame it on my home state of Wisconsin. I grew up in Eau Claire, which is not too far from a place called Elmwood, Wisconsin, which is one of the 3 UFO capitals of the world Wisconsin claims to have.
Really?
So
I didn't know that.
I started hearing about people seeing UFOs when I was in high school. So I just traveled to Elmwood and started researching and interviewing these people, seeing what they were seeing in the sky. And I started studying psychology at college, and I was really interested in why do some people believe in the paranormal and others do not? What is it about human perception and belief systems? So I started presenting at research symposiums, and this was very boring statistical stuff. You're glad you weren't there. But people in the audience would come up and say, I think my home's haunted, or I saw something in the sky I can't explain. Could you help me investigate? So it really just kind of spiraled from there.
Well, give us your first investigation that somebody actually asked you to do that. What was your first investigation?
Yes, the first one I ever did outside of my own initiation was when someone asked me to come out to an old dam where they were sitting one evening just watching the beautiful water go by. They were with a friend, and they looked behind them and they saw this glowing woman in white standing there. And one of the guys was too frightened to even bring us back to this dam where it was located, but the other one finally did. And so a ghost case, as it just so happens, was the first case I was actually called about. And I'd been doing UFO cases for quite some time before that, but that was mostly me interviewing witnesses that had seen things, going out, trying to track them down on my own.
Have you had your own personal experiences with UFOs yet?
Knock on wood here, no, I haven't. I've been out looking for 20-some-odd years now, out in the field, traveled to some of the hot spots around the world of UFO sightings, but nothing as of yet. But I'm still out there looking. Every single case I get, I'm hoping that that's the next one where maybe I'll see something, and maybe I won't. Maybe I never will, and that's fine, I guess, either way.
Well, and I've spent a lot of time in Michigan in the summers for the last 14 years, and I've heard more than one account off of Lake Michigan, which looks like a flippin' ocean, by the way,
Right.
where there's lots of underwater flying objects as well. Have you heard any reports of this yet?
Yes, you're right, Eddie, that there are a lot of these reports of unidentified submerged objects,
Yes.
UFOs, that I get a lot of reports by Lake Superior because that's closest to me of the Great Lakes. And people report seeing these crafts or these balls of light going in and out of the water without making any splash, moving through these areas as though they're moving just through air, that all of a sudden this craft will disappear into the bottom of the water. And you're right, Lake Superior especially, so big it is basically an ocean.
Yeah, and I have friends who have seen that first-hand account from their homes.
Really?
Yeah, the orbs of light in the middle of the night. It literally looks like there's a moon traveling underneath the surface of the water.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Wow. Yeah, I love this stuff.
And one thing that fascinates me about you is you have a psych background. And so the study of human behavior, I think, helps in this type of research. But when you approach a sighting or approach a location that has an entity, how do you look at it? Do you look at it from more of the psych background or just the human curiosity?
I try to do both. I try to go into each case, whether it's someone who believes their home is haunted or somebody who thought they saw a werewolf in the back roads of town, that I try to approach each case as not knowing the real history and background, that trying to let the case take me where it will, that when you're dealing with the weird, you have to ask yourself, what's too weird? So if there are some cases I get where it might seem so far-fetched, but then you say, wait a minute, what is too far-fetched? If we're dealing with ghosts and spirits, is there the possibility of other animals being out there and visitors from other places? So for me, I try to go in not knowing, because after 20-some years of doing this research, for a lot of stuff, I'm left with more questions than answers.
Which I think, for somebody like me and Eddie, and I'm sure yourself, the more answers and the more questions, I think, really keep us going, keep us fascinated.
And witnesses.
Yeah.
And I agree. I think every time I think I get a theory to explain away some of this stuff, I'll get a new case or a new witness that brings me right back to square one. And maybe there are many answers. I don't know. But I think part of it, the process of exploring this, looking to sort the history and the mystery from fact and fiction, that for me is the fun part of trying to find the real story behind some of these cases.
And also, a lot of people that do what you do are ghost hunters. That's all they do is ghost hunting. And I find this also fascinating, that you're not just a ghost hunter. You travel the world to look for many different, myths that hoping to prove that are true. So let's do a little world travel here. Let's go. What was the farthest location that you have been to and researched?
Well, great. For me, I think the farthest I was probably Transylvania in Romania.
Oh,
I know the Transylvania. What were you looking for?
And of course, I was looking for legends of vampire lore and of course werewolf legends as well. And I was also interested in just burial customs that differ from ours here. And when I was there, this was right when that flap of the media was covering all the stories of people that were in rural areas of Romania were having their loved ones cremated, and then they would grind up those cremated remains into a soup, and they would all drink that soup, thereby spreading out the spirit of that loved one so they could not come back and haunt you or terrorize you, that they'd be too weak to do that. And so when I was there, I was scouring the countryside looking for anyone making the soup And unfortunately, or maybe luckily for me, I wasn't able to find anyone. I was there. So I was there collecting legends, lore of not just vampires, but other creatures and burial customs as well.
Yeah, I think I would pass on that.
Yeah. Meanwhile, we noticed that you've been to Costa Rica and you've worked with the chupacabra. And a lot of people think, like Bigfoot, they think it's fake, it's not real. Yet there are hundreds, if not thousands of people who have absolutely claimed to have seen the chupacabra.
You're certainly right there. And when I was in Puerto Rico and other countries in Central America, I would talk to these farmers and ranchers, and they didn't care what it was necessarily. They wanted it to stop because it was killing their livestock.
Wow.
And I seemed to be just a couple days behind whatever was doing this killing. I talked to one farmer who told me in Puerto Rico that he noticed his dog was barking out in the backyard at night, seemed to be getting into some trouble, but they have no predators in Puerto Rico, so he wasn't worried. And then all of a sudden he heard his dog whimper, and he had never heard it before, so he popped out the back just in time to see what he reported to be your traditional chupacabra sighting. You know, this 3.5 to 4 foot tall creature with spikes down its back. It had wings, and it looked like a giant Sonic the Hedgehog from the video games. And he said it flew into the woods, but it didn't flap its wings. It kind of jumped and floated, much like Mothman reports of those out in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. But he went out, and his dog was dead. And again, he didn't care what animal did it. He just wanted it to stop.
And so this chupacabra, it has the wing. It almost sounds a little bit like a gargoyle, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's very accurate. Some people say that it has glowing eyes to it, and others say that it has large teeth. Some even say fangs. You know, others will report it has scales or spine on its spine, some spikes. And we often thought of these as being in Central and South America. And then we started getting reports throughout the United States. The most recent report I received was from a woman in Michigan, believe it or not, who was driving home when she saw a creature she thought was the chupacabra rummaging through some garbage bins.
Oh, wow.
Oh, my God.
It's like, here, kitty, kitty.
And, of course, she lived alone, and she lived out in the woods, and it was 11 o'clock at night, and all of a sudden she's like, oh, my God.
Yeah, and she sells her house the next year. Or next day. Yeah, this, like I said, I would love, I mean, this to me, this would be so much fun to, like, go out and look for these myths.
I'm fascinated by it.
It is fascinating, because Eddie and I have had the chance to interview a lot of people, you know, about Bigfoot and UFOs and stuff like this. But what is one of all the kind of the myths that you have always wanted to do, and you might maybe one of your favorites that you haven't got to do or you have got to track?
One of my favorites is being from the north woods of Wisconsin and the harsh winters that we have here in the Midwest. One creature that doesn't get a lot of publicity, if you will, like, you know, the Loch Ness Monster or Bigfoot, but it's that of the Wendigo.
Wendigo?
And it's a Native American creature thought to have been someone in the harsh Canadian or Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan winters that resorted to cannibalism and then was forced to walk the earth as this hideous Wendigo creature hell-bent on consuming human flesh.
Unreal.
And the natives believed that you could also be possessed by this creature, that there are numerous accounts in the late 1800s, early 1900s of native chiefs killing some of their own tribesmen and women because they thought they were infected by the Wendigo. And of course, the white law enforcement didn't take too kindly to that and arrested them. But to them, they said if I wouldn't have killed that person, they would have infected the entire tribe and we'd all be dead. So I love that story of the Wendigo.
Well, it's fascinating to hear you say what you just said, because in a way, not to make this too sci-fi, because I believe in what we're talking about. I know these things exist. I believe in portals to other dimensions. I believe that we can walk between worlds. I also believe the Native Americans have always been able to tap into this in a way that scientific technology has never been able to tap into to date. So what you just described, in a sense, was sort of zombie-ish, in that if this thing affected aspects of humanity, then they could go out and do bad things.
You're right. There was a recent case not too long ago of a man that was on a Greyhound bus going through Canada, when all of a sudden he just got up and started stabbing a passenger on the other aisle and killed him. And of course the bus driver came to a stop. Everyone got off the bus. They locked him on the bus. And then horrified witnesses were seeing this man starting to cut up his victim and starting to eat pieces of him.
Yeah.
And many people immediately thought he might have been possessed, like you said, a zombie type by this Wendigo and consuming human flesh.
Isn't this the same account where he cut someone's head off?
Yeah, he did. He cut it off, and then he held it up by the hair and kind of used it as a grisly trophy as he showed all of the passengers outside, you know, the grisly head, disembodied head there.
Yep.
And some of the body parts, pieces of the ear and such, they never were able to find that he had consumed them.
Yeah, and by the way, this happened at night on a cross-country trip. And yes, it's fascinating. And I love that you have a background in psychology.
Yeah, it just makes it more real and more authentic, I think, for a lot of people to hear it with somebody that has a background in psych. I think it's this genre of paranormal. There's so many skeptics. We had talked about it with Chris in the last one, and I think it is good to have, like you said, a healthy skeptic.
I think so too.
Background, but. Has there ever been a time that you walked away from one of your researches that you pretty much closed the book on it and said, I don't think this is real? Or do you always walk away and say, I didn't find evidence, but I'm going to leave it open?
Great
I'm going to leave
question.
that book open.
I would say 99% of the cases that I do, I try to present the background, the history, the folklore, my investigations. But then I leave it up to people to make up their own mind, hopefully by traveling to these places and deciding for themselves. But there's rarely a time where I will give up on a case. But I will give you one example. I was at a conference speaking on the paranormal, on monsters specifically, mysterious creatures. And after the program, a gentleman came up to me and he said he lived right in the area, that we had to come out to his farm because he had several Bigfoot creatures on his property. And I was with several other of my colleagues. I said, great, we have a ton of equipment here. Let's gather it up. Let's go there. And he said, you probably won't be able to see them. They're in a different dimension, and I can see them. And again, that's where it comes into, well, what's too weird for this phenomenon? So I said, okay, I'll still go with it. You know, if you see them, what are they doing? And that's when he went off saying, well, they're just like you and I are. They have cookouts at my house. They have a pool parties there, and there are a lot of them coming in. You know, and they're doing same things, watching games on television. And at that point, you know, I kind of thought maybe this one's not one to investigate.
Yeah, but you know, you said it in such a lovely way. You asked him the right questions, and you were open-minded and open-hearted. You gave him the benefit of the doubt, and then you just instinctually, you just knew it wasn't a match. Now, being from Wisconsin, as you said, I would love to know a little bit more about the Beast of Bray Road. Now, I think I saw a little something on TV about that not very long ago, and it scared the crap out of a whole community back there.
You're right. It was in Elkhorn, Wisconsin, which is a small southern town, rural area of Wisconsin. And it started when a friend and colleague of mine, Linda Godfrey, who was working as a journalist in Elkhorn, started getting reports from people who were traveling this small stretch of rural road called Bray Road. And that's when they were out there, usually at night, but not always, unsuspecting, driving their vehicle down the road when they looked off to the side and they saw, for lack of a better term, what they thought was a werewolf. this large creature the size of a bear, but it was shaped more like a wolf with these large muzzle and this deep, dark, matted down fur. And witnesses reported that it was a biped running upright on its hind legs like you and I do. And Linda started investigating these, and once her research got out, people from all over the United States started reporting similar creature of this giant, what you'd consider a werewolf if you look up, the traditional look of a wolf.
And Chad, what I saw, they were also talking about this sort of superhuman strength and how there were claw marks in the actual body of the big trucks and the cars. And that's back when they made trucks and cars heavy. But there were literally like scratch marks and stuff on the vehicles where it was like almost running up to speed with them.
People have reported that it seems to have supernatural strength or supernatural ability to move faster than known humans can. And that makes others believe that maybe it's not a flesh and blood type creature that you could kill, something like a bear or a moose, that it might be more supernatural in nature.
And by the way, okay, first of all, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to On Air with Tony Sweet. I'm Eddie Connor.
And I'm Tony Sweet.
And this is our Friday show where we talk about truth be told, where we believe an experience becomes your personal truth. Now, I have two questions. I love New Orleans. I am fascinated with the history of New Orleans, and I see dead people. So there, I'm out of the closet. That's number one. Number two, Chad, I am dying to know what investigation you did that shook you up so much that when you went home, you locked your doors, you bolted your windows, and you pulled the sheets up over your head with some Ben & Jerry's.
Yeah, you must have a blast in New Orleans then. And I mean, just wonderful time there, and all the history and the legends that go on for a very long time. For me, I always say that when you go to these places, for most people, if you're not getting scared, you're probably not trying hard enough. That just knowing the background of these places, whether something happens or not, hopefully it does, but even if it doesn't, some of these places are just creepy by nature. And I think one of the creepiest places I've ever been is right in my own backyard, so to speak, here in Wisconsin, in a small town called Plainfield, is the home of a gentleman called Ed Gein. And some of your listeners might recognize that name. Ed lived back in the 1940s and 50s.
Oh, my God.
They based the movie Psycho, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Silence of the Lambs.
Yes.
Those were all based on Ed Gein.
Yes.
Wow.
And Ed was a murderer. He killed two people that we know of, probably half a dozen more, including his own brother. But his passion in life was to wait until it got dark, and then he would fire up his pickup truck, head down to the nearby cemeteries, and dig up women that reminded him of his own dead mother.
Oh.
Ed would then bring those bodies back to his house and use them for furniture and lampshades and you name it, stuff we can't even get into on the radio.
Wow.
And townsfolk, when they caught Gein and discovered how truly grisly these crimes were, when they put him in a mental institution, they were going to open his house as a museum of horrors that you could go and visit. But in the middle of the night one evening, it mysteriously burned to the ground. Townsfolk torched it, allegedly.
Wow.
But
wow, that's amazing.
Many people believe Gein's spirit is still prowling his old farmland. So I think one of the scariest places I've been to is that farmland. I actually brought a couple mediums with me. They had no idea where we were going. They just thought we were in an abandoned field in Wisconsin. And as soon as we pulled into the area where Gein's home once was, they refused to get out of the car because they were picking up on so much negative energy. It was almost as though they were drained.
Yes.
And, I myself have no psychic ability, at least that I know of. So I was all game and ready to go, but they refused to get out of the car. And even just walking around, although nothing happened to me paranormal speaking, it was just creepy knowing all the deeds that took place on that land.
Well, and just a tad bit more of information about that that's not too gory. That is, Gein's Ed's mother died, and he kept her body in the house for a long time. Actually, he went back and I think dug it up and brought it back to the house, if I'm not mistaken. It wasn't part of him taking the skins and doing the things. I mean, and they said he was a little mentally challenged, correct?
Yes, indeed.
And that he had this really peculiar incestuous relationship with his mother, and they were very highly, and I want to say this carefully, they were very, very, very religious. And it was the mother and the father and then the two boys. And it just got really inappropriate really quick, and then all he wanted was the affection of his mother, and then she died. But he ended up getting the affection of his mother because he allegedly murdered his brother.
Oh, really?
Oh, I wouldn't have gotten out of the truck either.
I probably would have, just because I'd be more fascinated. But
you would have been by yourself.
I would have been creeped out. I mean, I'm sure
you
my hairs were standing on end thinking about it.
Chad, when you were speaking about it, I was literally covered
he was
with
like
goosebumps.
covering himself up.
And don't you also find with paranormal and all of your investigations, Chad, and if you're just tuning in, we're talking with Chad Lewis. He's a paranormal investigator, and we'll give you more of his contact information before we let him off the air. But don't you find in the paranormal places where the activity is really spiked or high or even negative, those seem to be the areas where there was all kinds of severe trauma or horrible things like what happened with Ed and his family. And whenever people die in these kind of scary ways, doesn't it really affect the energy in those areas more after they die than it did before?
I would agree with that, almost as though these cases of death, suicide, untimely accidents, murders, mob hits, serial killers, that they're so devastating that they seem to leave a psychological scar on the land, a curse, if you will, and that whether they attract paranormal activity or they're able to open it up, I'm not sure, but I would agree with that completely, that places that seem to have these tragic things unfold seem to be highly correlated with paranormal activity.
When you're on location and you're doing your research, when you feel or sense something, how does it affect you emotionally or physically? For me, the hair stands up on my arms and the top of my head, my neck, and if it's real strong activity, it's all over my body from head to toe. My eyes will start watering if a dead person comes around. So for you, I'm very interested to know how you interpret that energy when you're doing your research.
For me, it's more of a heightened sense of being on call, almost, if you will, that your body's running at a higher level, that it's for, if you're not used to it, like, most of us we don't have your talents, Eddie, or your gifts, whatever, you refer to them as, that for a lot of us, you don't realize it until about an hour in, and then all of a sudden you feel like you've run a marathon, that all your energy's gone because your adrenaline was kicking so high that all of a sudden it's gone and you're just drained. And again, I don't have any psychic ability. I don't pick up on things outside of anybody else. But yet when you're at these places, you can't help but to feel drained and worn down when you really shouldn't be.
Yeah, but it's because you're expending so much energy. Tony and I, a couple of weekends ago, we had the privilege of getting to spend the whole Saturday with Lisa Williams. She's a world-famous medium, and she has a mediumship school or spiritual development school here in Los Angeles. And there were probably 50 or more students attending the class, and there were 8 master mediums who all talk to dead people, and then Lisa. That was it was draining, but it was a great all-day workshop, maybe 9 or 10 hours. But the next day, I felt like I was hit by a truck.
Yeah, I did too.
I felt like I slept like 16 or 18 hours, but it was just so I could recoup my energy. And I find the exact same phenomenon whenever I'm in a haunted place or a place where there's a lot of activity. Now, I'm just being guided to ask you this weird question. When's the last time you, or if ever, you felt watched by something that wasn't there, whether you were doing an investigation or it was in some other area of your life. When's the last time you felt like you were being watched, or someone on your team could have sworn they were being watched, but there was nothing to back up that hunch?
Well, it's funny you asked that. This is perfect timing. That yesterday I was down in Iowa speaking in a small town, that evening giving a lecture last night. And yesterday I spent the day in the cemetery in Vinton, Iowa, Greenwood Cemetery. That the legend is that there's a statue there of a Civil War man dedicated to the Civil War fighters that are buried in the cemetery. And I put this in one of my books. I've been there many, many times, but this statue is alleged to come to life and move around and watch you while you're in the cemetery. So I had 4 or 5 hours. I was there early. I decided I was just going to stake out the statue and just watch it. Just hang out, not necessarily an official investigation. I didn't even break out any equipment. I just sat there and watched this thing. And I don't know what it was this time versus every other time, but as I was sitting there watching, I thought to myself, it would not surprise me one bit if the statue started moving, because I felt like there was something to it, that there was something more than it just being a statue. I don't know if the way it was carved or the way the eyes were in the statue, but I just got a sense that if I could have spent more time there, that maybe this thing would have just started moving.
Well, let me tell you what, and I've never met you, I've never talked to you, but I wrote down you were being watched. And they asked me to ask you about it. Like, were you sensed something was there? So even though you were there watching it, let me tell you, child, you were being watched. And I will even go this far. This literally just popped. It's a very loose, surfacey kind of read here, Chad. But I'm literally being told there were 3 people with you, watching over you, so that nothing. And I'm not going to be woo-woo because I don't even like woo-woo, and I'm a psychic. But there was 3 beings around you, connected to you in family and or some spirit guide, gatekeeper, whatever you want to call it. All humans have them. And you were being watched over by them so that nothing there would attach itself to you or come home with you. But you were absolutely unequivocally being watched, and they said it very clearly.
Yeah, he wrote that down.
Oh, that is great.
Yeah, you're protected. Well, you got a good heart, and you're fascinated by this stuff.
Oh, you can tell. You can tell that. I think this is like there's the old saying is there's childlike and childish, and you're childlike with this, because I think that's why you're so attracted to these spirits, to locations, to phenomena around the world, and I find it fascinating that you wrote so many books. You look like you're about 25 years old, but you have a whole series of books. Most haunted locations, and you have Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, South Dakota, Illinois, and Florida.
And you go out to Scotland, France, Belize, Nicaragua. You've got Florida. You've got Belize. It's crazy.
Yeah, and so first of all, where did you find the time to write all these books and to travel, or did you travel to all these locations to do your research?
That's one of the things that is very important to me, that I visit all these places that I write about or that I speak about, and that it's one thing to see them on television or to read a book, but it's a whole other matter when you're right there and you can get a feel of the scenery, the people, the story, what they're seeing and hearing and feeling. That's important for me to actually visit these places. And for me, that's half the fun, is that taking the back roads, hitting these roadside attractions that you never knew were there, these weird things, the biggest ball of twine, or Judy Garland's birthplace, all these things that you normally wouldn't maybe have stopped at, but yet because you're on a legend trip or traveling, that you're going to hit these things. And that's part, for me, is the adventure of it as much as the paranormal aspect.
Well, I'm fascinated with the gnomes. Now, I know that you checked them out when you were in Ireland and Scotland and France. Yeah, I'm dying to know what some of the people, the witnesses, have talked to you about as far as the gnomes are concerned?
Well, of course, over in Scotland and Ireland, I could walk into a pub and say, where do all the gnomes or fairies or wee folk hang out?
Yay!
And they would say, which ones do you want to know about?
Yeah.
Whereas I encourage any of your listeners to go into their local bar and ask where all the gnomes and fairies hang out, and they'll probably get kicked out of the bar.
Well, unless you go to West Hollywood, then you.
Well, that's a totally different kind of fairy.
Right. So I love these stories, and most people over in Ireland and Scotland, they believe that these creatures had supernatural abilities, that they could take your sight, your hearing, even your life. They could lull you to sleep and then into their world if you weren't careful.
Yep.
So they recommended bringing an offering for these creatures, whether it was a shiny rock or some M&Ms, something as an offering. And
M&Ms would make me.
we have a spot in Minnesota, a Pipestone National Monument. It's a sacred area for Native Americans because it's where they get their stone for their pipe, their ceremonial pipe. And it's red, they literally believe, from the blood of their ancestors. And there are also many, many stories there in Pipestone, Minnesota, of the little people wandering the sacred area. And many of the stone carvers didn't want to talk about it, not because they were being rude or unfriendly, but because in their belief, it was that even the mere mention of these things put you on their radar, if you will, that when you go looking for the weird, sometimes the weird comes looking for you. So they didn't even want to open themselves up to it. Just the mere fact that they would talk about it would be enough for these creatures to come after them.
Well, and I'll tell you something. I'm a firm believer in the fairies and the gnomes and the pans and the little people because I've seen them since I was little, and I see them as pinpoints of lights and other things. But as an adult, I went to the big island of Hawaii, and so they have the caverns there, like under the volcanoes and all of that stuff. So I was hanging out there, and my friend and I, Karen, went to see some big place where you could get high up on the mountain and look down into the pit, and we were the only ones there. There was no vegetation anywhere, but I saw a little patch of greenery off to the edge on the other side of the road, and I saw a handful of little people. And by little people, I don't mean the politically incorrect term midgets. I'm talking about the wee people, the fairies. And I said, oh, my God, look over there, just to see if she would see it. And she said, what is it? And I told her. She said, don't talk about them. Don't speak about them. Don't ever say anything about them again, because she did not want them to come a-calling. Now, I didn't know that part of it. But I know that philosophy where don't speak about it and it won't come and talk to you when you're trying to sleep.
A lot of these beliefs followed us over when our ancestors came from the old countries, that these beliefs of having a healthy dose of respect for these supernatural beings. And I have many other accounts of the wee folk or the gnomes, what be it, helping people out and being favorable in things and being a positive aspect to their life. But others believe that you should, treat them with respect, that they could do you harm, whether physical or spiritual or psychological.
Yep. And that's where it's fascinating that your background is in psychology, because the human belief system is a fascinating thing. And the subconscious mind wired into that, you can really attract some heavy-duty stuff to you if you can't keep your belief systems and your subconscious mind on track and in alignment with what you really want instead of what you don't want.
Amen to that. And, on Truth Be Told, we talk a lot about UFOs. And we had talked a little bit about earlier, but somebody was asking me the other day, and we've interviewed somebody maybe a year ago about this, about crop circles. And I know you also had an opportunity to investigate some crop circles. And crop circles can be tricky because, of course, there are a lot of man-made crop circles, and then there's some that are not explained. So can you give us your account and your experience with crop circles?
I've investigated personally a little over a dozen crop formations or crop circles throughout the Midwest. And There were some, as you alluded to, that we believed were hoaxed, some that we believed had an explanation that we couldn't solve. We have one case where a farmer actually looked out into his neighbor's field and he saw the wind moving the crops like waves in the ocean. A storm was coming in. And then he said he saw a cloud, a storm cloud, over the crops, and then within a few seconds it came down, brushed onto the ground, and then the next thing he knew, there was a crop formation in the field. So, of course, all the media and the investigators said it was the weather that created it. But there was something weird about the cloud as he described it, that maybe something was in that cloud. But I agree with you. I think some of these are hoaxed. Some of them are maybe weather-induced. And then others, I simply have no idea that we've taken soil samples and crop samples and sent them into Nancy Talbot of BLT Research, and they're finding magnificent differences in the stuff that's been pushed down, the affected stuff, versus the standing stuff, the controls. And stuff you wouldn't think. 5 feet away, you would think that a thing of corn would be the same regardless of whether it's 3 feet or 5 feet away.
Right.
But they're finding very interesting differences. But what does that mean? You know, I have no idea, and that's the frustrating part.
You know something, Chad, what just popped in my mind, it could be intuition, it could just be an idea, I don't know, because I'm not the expert here, you are. But I got 2 quick images. Number one, well, 3. The first one is, I believe in multidimensionality, and I think you do too. And I believe that certain things carry a vibration that are so high, fast, and pure that the human eye will not always see them. I also know through my own research that oftentimes a UFO, if you will come in camouflaged in something like a cloud. So number one, I believe that it could be holding a frequency so high that we just can't see it with the naked eye. But here's the other 2 things I've never, ever seen until this very moment, and I feel like you're triggering that. Number one, obviously, the crop circle symbols are going to be something from some kind of a sign, some kind of thing for other ships that are flying overhead. You know what I mean? Like the Nazca lines, for lack of a better way to say it. And here's the thing that's kind of common and kind of common sense. But here's something I've never heard. I would love, whenever they're doing the research and they're going with their equipment to test the soil samples, I feel like there's something 20, 30, 40, 50 feet underneath that crop circle that nobody's thought to check that far down. And so it feels like there's something down there to pay attention to as well for whatever reason, like certain things are being planted along the way that could be detonated later, and I don't mean like a minefield or anything like that, but something signals, something that's planted there that's sort of like a tracking device. I know that sounds weird, but that's exactly what I just saw.
And you may be onto something, certainly, because I don't know of any cases where people have dug down that deep. That would be really great if you could get permission on one of these formations from the farmer or the rancher. To the first part of your comment of the frequency of that maybe we can't see it and that maybe they're disguising it, I will say that many people, as you guys probably already know, do have some type of odd feeling when they go into a formation. Some people will get sick and dizzy or feel like they're going to vomit, where others can just feel a sense that there's some type of power or some type of energy there, and they'll actually go there, and some people bring dowsing rods and have trouble with that. And they'll have trouble with their electronics, their watch, their equipment, and so forth, that there may be something to it. But I absolutely love your idea of something being down deep, and I would love to see something done about that.
It feels like a transmission signal or something deeper down that's being planted across the globe in different places. It's got that
sense.
feel. It's like something in a great movie, actually.
I mean, I'm sure if you connect like points around, I'm sure that's kind of a wow. I never thought of that either. Look at you, Eddie.
The Incas, the Egyptians, the Native Americans, they know that it's just all 1 degree of separation energetically. I mean, hello.
So when you surround yourself with people like yourself, how do you find your crew? How do you find your people to to trust enough to take with you to be a part of your team? How do you decide that?
Partly it's depending on what phenomenon I'm investigating. As you said earlier, that a lot of these paranormal groups are paranormal in name, but they like to focus on ghosts and spirits and hauntings, and
right.
That's what they enjoy. So if I'm doing a haunted place in Florida, I may meet up with some investigators that do hauntings down in Florida. If I'm looking for a sea serpent, I can call other people. So I have a few people that I work with all the time because I've worked with them for 20 years, and we all have the same kind of outlook and same way that we want to investigate. And that's one thing let me touch on just quickly, that a lot of people just starting out, they always ask, how do I start out? And I tell them to go to a group that's already out there and see if they're investigating the way you like to investigate. Because for some people, they like to be as scientific as they can, that they want to interview witnesses, dig up new history and research, and go there and set up a ton of equipment. Other people are more just looking to legend trip, that they want to go to the Beast of Bray Road and see it, and if they can't, they're off to look for a UFO at the hot spot. So I always encourage people to find the way they want to do it and go with that. But for me, I'm always bringing new people along. People always ask if they can come along, and a fresh set of eyes and ears is great. That, especially if I'm working with some of the same people I've worked with for a long time, sometimes you can get in those roles that you've done, and you get in the same pattern. Mm-hmm. So having fresh perspective, even if there's somebody who has no background in paranormal research, it's great to have that fresh set of eyes there.
I love that. I love that idea. What place is it that you want to visit next? What's on your radar next, Chad, that you just cannot wait to go dive into and research?
Well, I've been on a sea serpent kick because my last book was on a sea serpent. So believe it or not, one of the places I've never been is Lake Champlain after the Champ Monster, and I'm looking at doing an expedition this summer there. So that's one place that I've just never been, but always wanted to go, but just never found my way there. So I'm going to go look to try to capture the Champ.
Wow. And meanwhile, this makes me think of a super quick question. Have you noticed that the Bigfoots, the Chupacabras, the wolf man, the skunk monster, the skunk ape in Florida, that sort of thing, is one of the common denominators with each of these type of beings that they have this grotesque stench about them that's almost otherworldly?
Yes, that's one thing people pick up on. And sometimes I'll get reports from people that will be out in the woods or in the Everglades, as you said, down in Florida, and they may not even see something. They'll hear something in the wood or near, but then they're overcome with this stench, whether it's like the skunk ape, which looks like an ape and smells like a skunk, or the big muddy monster down in Murfreesboro, Illinois, that smells like it just crawled out of the river, like a mud monster. And I think that's something that just stands out as being weird, that these animals have, or creatures, beings, entities, whatever you want to put on them, that they do emit some type of weird odor that we can pick up on right away.
Yeah, that's just so weird and otherworldly. And that last one that you just mentioned, I saw a little bit of a documentary on that where it came out and it attacked a woman and cut her legs, and there were marks and stuff, and they did samples, and there was nothing human or animal that could have done it, and they told her to shut her mouth.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
It attacked her in front of her kids.
And they still told her to be quiet. Well, the skunk ape, I think, is my father, because he has a pretty good smell to him.
Oh, Lord.
All right. Well, unfortunately, our time is run out, and I promise that to all of our listeners that I'm going to throw this out there, that Chad will come back and join us again. Please, because we have so much more to ask you.
You guys made this way too easy and way too fun.
Oh, good.
Yay, that's what we love.
Yay, we love hearing it. All right, so how can people find you? I'm going to put up your websites. This is Chad Lewis. You can go to unexplainedresearch.com or chadlewisresearch.com. Is there any other locations, social media that we can follow you and keep up on your research?
Yeah, if you want to, just go to Backroads Lore, and you can follow where I'm going to be and contact me and see if you want to come with.
Oh, don't tempt us, because I have a feeling you and Eddie are going to work together.
Oh my God!
It popped into my head.
Have you done the mental institutions and things like that yet, Chad?
Yes, a lot of abandoned insane asylums and old hospitals. Yes, I love those places.
Eddie wants to go with you.
I'm scared of those places because I'd have to be with somebody grounded. And I think you're grounded, Chad. I do.
I want to see that video.
Oh, you'll see me run out of the room like a flipping. No.
All right, Chad. Well, thank you so much again, and we so are honored to have you on the show. So much great information, and thanks for doing the research that many of us would love to do or just don't have the balls to do.
Yeah, we appreciate it. And please, we're serious. Come back.
Yeah, come back.
Let us know what else you've got on your plate so we can support you.
All right, keep an eye out, guys.
Oh, we will. Chad Lewis, everybody. Thank you, Chad. All right, so Eddie.
Yes.
We're going to take a break.